Many years ago, when I was in the Army, I was sent to Vietnam. I was in the Army infantry. I had 2 weeks in Saigon where I could do anything I want pretty much. So I went exploring. I walked up and down the city streets, taking in everything that I saw, heard, and smelled. And let me tell you something, there were some smells. Um, I was walking down one street, and there was a little old lady squatting in front of a box of oranges. And she took her hands and she picked up an orange and she lifted it up to me. And I could see that her hands didn't have any fingers. And I looked down at her feet, and many of her toes were gone. And I knew that I was looking at my first leper. Well, months later, I was at my what you call a duty station in the central highlands of Vietnam, 4th Infantry Division. It was about 10,000 men. Um, I got a package from my next door neighbor back home from Mr. Brooks. He sent me 2 metal tins full of hard candy. And you open them up and they were beautiful. I mean, all kinds of colors and shapes, and some of them looked like jewels, and some of them looked like fruit, and everything that you could think of. Different flavors, different colors, different sizes. I got an idea. I had access to a Jeep, so I talked to a driver, and I asked him if he would take me out to the leper colony out beyond the base. And we went out. Now, we were wearing our normal soldier apparel. We had a rifle and flak jacket and helmet and canteen and on and on and on. We came to the village. We stopped, parked the Jeep. I got out and I rattled a tin. And the people were just standing off in the distance looking at us. They don't get many visitors. And the children started coming up, and I opened up the tin and I put it down close for them to see what was in it. And the children came up and they were helping themselves. And this was probably the first time that they had ever seen hard candy like this. One little girl, she was a beautiful little girl. I don't know how old she was, maybe 10, maybe. She didn't appear to have leprosy. She had all of her fingers and toes. And I realized that she was probably living there with her parents who had, who have leprosy. She took out a piece of candy and held it in her hands like that and looked at it as though it was the most precious item that she had ever had in her life. She didn't know whether to eat it or just to look at it. It kind of broke my heart. Uh, a woman came out. She had a little baby, less than a year old, and you could see the area behind its ear was very, very thin, and it was throbbing with every heartbeat. And I realized this little baby was getting ready to lose its ear. And I looked at the people, they were of all ages, young, old, babies, old people. Some had lost some digits, others had lost all their digits. A few had lost their nose, and some had lost their mouth. The lips were gone. It was probably the worst thing I had ever seen. It wasn't until years later when I read this verse from Mark 1, verses 40 through 42. Now a leper came to him, that's Jesus, imploring him, kneeling down to him and saying to him, "If you are willing, you can make me clean." Then Jesus, moved with compassion, stretched out his hand and touched him and said, "I am willing, be thou cleansed." And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy left him and he was cleansed. There's a lot being said there. I did a little research into what leprosy was like in the first century when Jesus was alive. The Levitical law in the book of Leviticus, God handed down a law that said that the priest is to examine someone that is suspected of having leprosy. And he is to inspect them, and if they have leprosy, they are determined to be unclean. Now, there were hundreds of laws back in those days, laws that God had uttered. But there were thousands of laws that man had created. Just for instance, to give you an idea how ridiculous they were, if a woman was to look in a mirror on the Sabbath and pluck a gray hair off of her face or out of her hair, that was considered reaping. And you cannot reap on the Sabbath. That was a sin. That's how ridiculous it got. Well, they had traditions regarding the lepers. If a leper came into your town or into your village, they had to shout for all to hear, "Unclean, unclean, unclean," as they go down the street. And they had to approach from downwind. You notice that he came close enough to Jesus that he could say, "If you will, you can make me clean." That was faith talking. Jesus recognized his faith and he said, "I will," and put forth his hand and touched him. He touched him while he was a leper, and then he said, "Be thou cleansed." And he was cleansed in that moment. Jesus touched a leper, and according to the priests and according to the traditions of the religious, he could have been declared a leper himself. I don't think anybody would dare to do that. But that just gives you some kind of idea how the people felt about leprosy. We don't have leprosy in America today. It's been cleaned up. But I think we do have people that are considered to be like the lepers. If a person isn't cool at school, he's treated like a leper. Or if they're fat, or if they're ugly, or if they're geeks, God forbid that they should be smart and be interested in subjects that are way over everybody else's head. They were treated like lepers. Jesus wouldn't dare treat anybody like that. If you want healing, come with faith to Him and say, Lord, if you will, you can heal me. And I can hear Him say, I will, as He puts forth His hand to heal you. That was Bible Nugget, Mark 1, verses 40 and 42. Meditate on that with what you have heard. Thank you for listening.